I sat at the dinner table, trying to make sense of what my wife, Claire, was saying. It was our 5th wedding anniversary, and the mood was supposed to be romantic, candlelight, fancy wine, the whole works. But when Claire opened her mouth and told me she wanted to sleep with other men, my entire world collapsed. I had arranged everything meticulously: reservations at an upscale restaurant, a sparkling diamond necklace she'd hinted at for months, and a night that was supposed to be perfect. But instead of thanking me, Claire's words came out like a wrecking ball. "I want to explore." Outside our marriage, I could barely breathe. I stared at her, my mind racing. Was this real? My gorgeous wife of 5 years, sitting across from me, eyes darting nervously around the room like she couldn't face me? We had always shared everything, or at least I thought we did. Why? My voice cracked, filled with confusion and hurt. "I need to feel alive again, Brad," she said softly, avoiding eye contact. "It's not that I don't love you. I just need more. I need freedom to figure out who I am." Freedom? Figure out who she is. It felt like my chest was caving in. I gripped the edges of the table, trying to keep steady, trying to process the words pouring out of her mouth. "So, what? You're asking for my blessing to go have sex with other men?" The way she hesitated before responding told me everything I needed to know. "Yes, but it's not about just sex. It's about me." A surge of anger burned through me. I leaned in closer, trying to stay calm, but I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. "You're saying you want to cheat on me, and I'm supposed to be okay with that?" Claire lowered her voice, probably realizing the gravity of what she had just asked me. "I don't want to hurt you, Brad. I want us to stay together. I love you, but I need to find out more about myself. I need to feel a different kind of connection." I could barely contain my rage. "You think sleeping with other men will make you a better wife?" I hissed through clenched teeth. Other diners at nearby tables were starting to glance over. "Is that what you're telling me?" She looked down at her half-empty wine glass, twisting it nervously between her fingers. "It would only be for a few months," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I promise after that, it would be just you and me again." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. What kind of twisted logic was this? My wife was proposing to step out on me, like some kind of casual experiment, and then come back like everything would be fine. "A few months?" I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. "You think you can put our marriage on pause, go screw around, and then we'll just pick up where we left off?" She nodded, still avoiding my eyes. "I think I need this, Brad, and I think it could help us in the long run." I pushed my chair back, the sound screeching through the restaurant. I had to get out of there. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered under my breath, grabbing my coat. "I can't even look at you right now." "Brad, wait," she called after me, her voice desperate, but I was already walking out. The restaurant doors swung shut behind me as I stepped into the cold night air. I couldn't believe what had just happened. My head spun as I walked to my car, numb, unable to process the fact that Claire had just blindsided me with the most outrageous request I could ever imagine. She wanted to explore her freedom, while I was supposed to sit back and watch. I drove for what felt like hours that night, the city lights blurring into streaks as I tried to make sense of everything. How could Claire, my wife, the woman I had planned a future with, so casually drop a bomb like that? Did she think I'd just stand by and accept it? I found myself parked at some random overlook, staring out at the skyline. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. A string of texts from Claire flooded the screen. "Brad, please come back. Where are you? Let's talk about this." But I couldn't face her right now. The woman I thought I knew had just shattered everything I believed about our marriage. All I could see in my mind were the horrible images of her with someone else. My stomach twisted. The worst part was the way she said it, as if it was nothing, like she was just asking me to let her try a new hobby. "I'll come back to you," she had said. What kind of sick fantasy was that? How was I supposed to take her back after she explored other connections? I knew I couldn't stay in that car forever. I had to confront her, get real answers, even if it ripped me apart. The sun was starting to rise by the time I pulled into our driveway, still wearing last night's suit, rumpled and exhausted. Claire rushed out of the house, her face full of relief. "Brad, Oh, thank God. I've been so worried, she cried, trying to hug me. I pulled back, feeling the distance between us grow by the second. We need to talk, I said coldly. About what you said last night. She nodded, her face dropping, realizing that this wasn't going to be some quick patch-up. Okay, she whispered, following me inside. I headed straight for the kitchen, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat down at the table. My mind was still racing, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to find out if this woman, the one sitting across from me, was still the same Claire I married, or if she had already made up her mind to leave me emotionally. Claire sat across from me at the kitchen table, her eyes searching my face for any sign of understanding, but all I felt was a growing storm inside me. So, I began, my voice steady but cold. Tell me again why you feel the need to explore? She fidgeted with her hands, looking down at the table. I don't know, Brad. I feel like I'm missing something. I need to figure out who I am. I stared at her, barely able to hold back the flood of anger rising in my chest. So, what, you're going to go off, sleep with other men, and magically figure that out? And I'm supposed to just wait for you to finish? She shook her head quickly. No, it's not just about sleeping with someone. It's about freedom. I need to experience things outside of us, so that I can come back and be the wife you deserve. Her words stung like poison. The wife I deserve? Claire, the wife I deserve wouldn't be telling me she wants to screw around. She winced but didn't deny it. I know it sounds crazy. I know this isn't what you want to hear, but I need this. And I want you to understand. I leaned back, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Understand? You're asking me to stand by while you destroy our marriage. What do you think happens if I say no? You just go out and do it anyway? Claire bit her lip, her silence confirming my worst fear. She had already made up her mind. She was going to do this, no matter what I said. I'll still come home to you, Brad. I'm not leaving. I want you to be a part of my life, but I also need this for myself. A cold chill crept up my spine. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had married, was slipping away from me right before my eyes. I stood up, not sure what else to say. You want my blessing? Fine. But know this, Claire. If you walk down this path, things will never be the same. Her eyes filled with tears as I turned and walked out of the kitchen. She didn't try to stop me. Maybe she knew she'd already crossed a line. The next few days felt like I was living in someone else's life. Claire didn't leave right away, but there was an uncomfortable distance between us now. It was as if a shadow had settled over our home, the weight of what she had said hanging in the air. I avoided her as much as I could, spending late nights at the office or taking long drives just to clear my head. I couldn't bear to be around her, knowing that she was planning her escape. One evening, I came home to find her in the kitchen, quietly making dinner, as if nothing had changed. She glanced up at me, her expression unreadable. We need to talk, she said, her voice soft but firm. I wasn't in the mood for more of her twisted logic, but I nodded and sat down at the table. Go ahead. Claire sat across from me, folding her hands in her lap. I've decided. I'm going to stay with a friend for a while, just until I figure things out. A wave of nausea hit me. It was real now. She was leaving, maybe not permanently, but she was stepping out of our life, out of our marriage, to explore her options. And where are you planning to stay? With Jenna, she said, naming her best friend from work. She's been really supportive, and she's offered me a place for as long as I need. I bit the inside of my cheek, fighting the urge to yell. Jenna was divorced, living alone, and always stirring the pot with her opinions about relationships. Let me guess, I said, my tone biting. She's the one who encouraged you to do this? Claire frowned. No, Brad. This is my decision. She just helped me see that I need to follow my heart. Follow her heart. I almost laughed out loud. So that's it, then? You're moving out? For now, yes, she said, her voice barely audible. But I'm not leaving you, Brad. I'll come back. Eventually, I stood up, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a lead blanket. You do what you need to do, Claire. But don't expect everything to be the same when you decide you want to come back. I left the room before she could respond, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of the end. The next weekend, Claire packed her things and left. I watched from the doorway as she loaded her suitcase into the trunk of her car. She didn't cry. She didn't even look back. With a quick, "I'll call you later," she drove off, leaving me standing in an empty house that suddenly felt too big and too quiet. I didn't know what to do with myself. I spent the next few hours wandering around, aimlessly picking up things: her favorite coffee mug, the blanket she always wrapped herself in while watching TV, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. How had we gone from a happy marriage to this in just a matter of days? I couldn't just sit there. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door, not even sure where I was going. I ended up at a small bar I hadn't been to in years. It wasn't fancy, just a hole in the wall where nobody knew me. That was exactly what I needed. I sat down at the bar and ordered a whiskey, hoping it would numb the pain swirling in my chest. But as the alcohol burned its way down my throat, I realized it wasn't going to help. Nothing could take away the ache of knowing that my wife was out there somewhere, exploring her life without me. It was a thought that gnawed at my gut, twisting me up inside. The bartender, a scruffy guy with a worn face, refilled my glass without saying a word. It was like he knew I didn't want to talk. After my second drink, I stepped outside, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. I leaned against the wall, staring up at the sky. I couldn't go on like this, letting her dictate the terms of our marriage. If Claire wanted to live some kind of open life, I had to decide what I was going to do. I wasn't going to sit around, waiting for her to return when she was done finding herself. For the first time in days, I felt a strange sense of clarity. If she was willing to throw away our life together for some thrill, then maybe it was time I started thinking about my future without her. The following week was a blur. I threw myself into work, trying to drown out the noise in my head. Every time my phone buzzed, I half hoped it was Claire telling me she'd changed her mind. But instead, all I got were short, awkward texts. "I'm staying at Jenna's. I need more time." Nothing about coming back, nothing about fixing what was broken. I spent most evenings at the gym, pushing myself to exhaustion just to avoid going home. I'd run on the treadmill until my legs felt like jelly, or lift weights until my arms were shaking. Anything to stop thinking about where she was and what she was doing. Was she with someone? Was she already testing out this new life of hers? The questions haunted me, especially at night. Lying alone in our bed, the silence was deafening. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured her with someone else, laughing, being carefree, doing all the things we used to do together. Only now with another man. One night, after tossing and turning for hours, I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for her to come to her senses. If Claire wanted to live her life as if I didn't exist, then I was going to do the same. I had my own needs, my own desires, and I wasn't going to stay faithful to someone who clearly didn't care about the sanctity of our marriage. The next day, I reached out to an old friend, Jenna's name coming to mind again, but not as a friend this time. Jenna had been Claire's closest confidant, and maybe she was partially responsible for planting these ideas in her head. But there had always been a tension between us, one that Claire never noticed. Maybe it was time I explored what that tension really was. That evening, I texted Jenna and asked if she wanted to grab a drink. The answer came back almost immediately. "Sure, Brad. I'd love to." The game was about to change, and this time, I wasn't playing by Claire's rules. That Friday night, I met Jenna at a low-key bar downtown. The kind of place where nobody asked questions, and the lights were dim enough to hide any second thoughts. She arrived, looking a little too put together for what I expected. Tight dress, bold lipstick. She knew what she was doing. "Brad," she smiled, sliding into the booth across from me. "I wasn't sure you'd actually text me." I shrugged, pretending I hadn't been thinking about it for days. I needed to get out of the house. She gave me a knowing look, her eyes flickering with something more than casual friendship. "I get it." Claire told me a little about what's been going on. Her voice dropped a bit, like she was about to share a secret. "But I want to hear your side." I took a deep breath, the frustration and hurt bubbling just beneath the surface. There's not much to say. She wants to find herself, or whatever that means. And I'm supposed to just sit around and wait. Jenna nodded, leaning in a little closer. "You deserve more than that, Brad." You deserve to be with someone who actually values you. Her words hung in the air, heavier than they should have been. I could feel the tension between us growing, the same tension that had always been there but never spoken out loud. It felt dangerous, but also exciting. You're probably right, I muttered, my eyes meeting hers. We talked for a while, but the conversation drifted into something different, charged with unspoken possibilities. By the time we finished our drinks, the air between us was thick with everything we hadn't said. I didn't know if it was the whiskey or just the anger I was carrying around, but when she touched my arm, it sent a jolt through me. "So, Brad," she whispered, her voice soft and inviting, "what now?" The answer was already in my head. I didn't hesitate. "Why don't we get out of here?" Jenna smiled, her lips curling into something that made it clear she knew exactly where this night was heading. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel guilty about it. The night with Jenna was a blur, a whirlwind of emotions I hadn't felt in years. We ended up at her apartment, where the tension that had been simmering between us finally boiled over. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts, just raw, undeniable chemistry. I woke up the next morning tangled in her sheets, the weight of what I had done slowly settling in. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I realized something. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel anything, really, just a strange sense of clarity, like a fog had lifted. Claire had made her choices, and now, so had I. Jenna stirred beside me, her hand resting on my chest. "Morning," she whispered, her voice soft and warm. "Morning," I replied, feeling oddly calm. For a moment, we just lay there in comfortable silence. But as the minutes passed, reality started to creep back in. This wasn't going to be a long-term thing. I knew that, and deep down, I suspected Jenna knew it too. As I got dressed, Jenna sat up in bed, watching me with a curious expression. "So, what happens now?" she asked, her tone light but with an edge of uncertainty. I shrugged, not really sure how to answer. "I don't know. But this doesn't change anything." She nodded, as if she had expected that answer. "You're still going to try to work things out with Claire, aren't you?" I paused, thinking about Claire and everything that had happened over the last few weeks. Could we even work things out after all this? Did I even want to? "I don't know, Jenna," I said honestly. "I really don't know anymore." She smiled faintly, her eyes a little sad. "Well, if you ever need an escape again, you know where to find me." I nodded, not promising anything but knowing that the door had been left wide open. As I left her apartment and stepped out into the crisp morning air, I realized that whatever happened next, I couldn't go back to the way things were. Not with Claire. Not with my marriage. Things were different now, and they were about to get even more complicated. A few weeks passed, and life settled into a strange new routine. Claire was still staying at Jenna's, and we barely spoke. I had started to accept that this was our new normal, separate lives, separate paths. But then, one afternoon, I got a knock on the door that would change everything. It was Claire. She stood on the porch, looking unsure, clutching a large brown envelope in her hands. I stared at her for a long moment, wondering what she could possibly want now. "Brad, can we talk?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I stepped aside, letting her in, but I didn't offer her a seat. I wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. "What's this?" I asked, pointing to the envelope she held. She swallowed hard. "It's the divorce papers." I wasn't surprised. I had been expecting this, but seeing the reality of it in her hands felt like a punch to the gut. "So, it's really over then?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. Claire blinked, her eyes filling with tears. "I thought this is what you wanted, Brad. You've been distant, and I didn't know how else to fix things." I shook my head, anger and frustration bubbling to the surface. "You think this is fixing things? Walking out on me? Sleeping with other men? How is that fixing anything, Claire?" She looked down, biting her lip, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. I thought I needed something different. But now, I don't know." I let out a bitter laugh. "Well, it's too late for second thoughts. You already made your choice, Claire. And so have I." She looked up at me, her eyes widening. What do you mean? I paused for a moment, the weight of everything we'd been through hanging heavy between us. I've moved on, Claire. I'm seeing someone else. The shock on her face was unmistakable. She hadn't expected that. You? What? I nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. Yeah, you're not the only one who needed to figure things out. For a moment, she didn't say anything, just stood there, her expression a mix of disbelief and regret. I didn't know, she whispered. I thought we could still work things out. I shook my head. You left, Claire. You made your decision, and I'm done chasing after you. The silence between us was deafening. Claire wiped at her eyes, nodding slowly. I guess this is really it then, she said softly. Yeah, I replied, my voice steady. It is. She handed me the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly, and then turned toward the door. Goodbye, Brad, she said quietly. As the door clicked shut behind her, I felt a strange sense of closure. It was over, really over. And though it hurt, I knew I was finally free. Free to move forward, to live my life on my terms, without her.